Hello, I'm Cedar Falls Mayor Jim Brown, and this is a special edition of the Mayor's Corner. As many have heard, former Mayor John Cruz passed away Thursday, April 6, 2017. A sad day indeed for our great city. On behalf of the city of Cedar Falls, I would like to convey our condolences to the family of John Cruz. There's no doubt he held an icon status in Cedar Falls. I believe many would join me in stating the history books will rank John Cruz in the same category as our founding mayors. Names like Overman, Malarkey, and Melendi, that's the kind of impact he had. It's not just the title of mayor that made John such an attribute to the city. It was his love for the city, the volunteer work he performed, the events he attended, and his passion to serve. As one looks around Cedar Falls, from bike trails to city parks, various city partners to downtown and virtually anything else, there's not much that John Cruz didn't have an impact or an involvement with. We thought that hearing briefly from those close to Mayor Cruz throughout his life and career would be a fitting tribute.
Can you tell me your fondest memory of Mayor Cruz?
There are so many that it would really be hard to narrow them down. Dave and I and John were very close socially. We were very good friends, as well as colleagues. And so we have so many memories of him in so many slapstick situations that it's going to be really difficult.
Personally, I think his real legacy is going to be how he acted on his love for the city.
We spent a lot of time together, needless to say, during the campaign, but we became good friends beside that. But I think how humble he was. I never felt that you ever saw anything that he was bragging or anything about him being mayor and for as long as he was.
Most people don't know that John was a fairly emotional person. He cared a great deal about people and the difficulties or hardships that they were facing in their lives. As John moved through his career, he had his own difficulties, and it made him more sensitive to these types of things. It was not uncommon for him to be in a meeting and talk about a very difficult subject, and his lip would start to quiver, or sometimes tears would come to his eyes, simply because he cared so much. And I think the one thing we can all learn from Mayor Cruz is we all need to be much more caring about those that are having some hardships.
Well, this is kind of a hard one to get through. I've got notes because I've known John 57 years, but I shared my colon cancer diagnosis with John back in November of 2015, and his compassion for my ailment and was heartfelt and very meaningful. And then when John was diagnosed with liver cancer in 2016, 2017, I became part of his support group. And he called me every single day, even when he was at the Mayo Clinic with appointments.
I would miss his caring when Sharon was in the hospital in a very serious operation. He showed up the next day with a potted plant, and he gave it to her, and he had a tear in his eye. He really cares about the people of Cedar Falls, and that impressed me because I wouldn't expect him to show up in the first place because it was a long time ago. But that's the kind of person he was. He's always working for the underdog.
I started here 30 years ago as a police officer. I didn't live in Cedar Falls. I'm not from this area. But when I came here, I met John Cruz as a police officer, had very little contact with him. Didn't maybe think a whole lot about the mayor and their position and what they did when you first come to town when you're younger with your job. And as years went on, you begin to learn more and more about the mayor. And you really begin to see that the mayor was in it to help make this city the best city it could be.
The fact that he was very approachable by everybody in the community. You might totally disagree with what he was doing, but he would take the time to listen to you and wanted to hear your side of the viewpoint of what your thoughts were. And I just think that's a good attribute to have in a mayor of a community.
I think he was just someone who was very active here at City Hall. He, his intentions were always good, that he wanted to do something good for the community, and he just, I think, always wanted the best for Cedar Falls. And I think just interacting with him and seeing him every day at City Hall, you always could see that about him. You always heard that from him, and so that's what I'll probably remember.
And I will tell you, the door to his office was always open. If it wasn't open, I'd put a note under the door. And It was never a time, even if his secretary wasn't in there, that I couldn't yell John. And if he answered, I'd go in and talk to him.
To this day, my kids, they'll still remember the letters they received from Mayor Cruz. They don't live in the community anymore, but they still receive letters or notes from John. He was great. That personal touch with John was really a great attribute that he had, that he brought to our community.
He has certain political attributes that not even politicians have, nor do they understand why they should have them. Forgiveness, just their genuineness, their genuine care about the people that they serve in the cities, in the city that they serve. I think it's a rare quality in politicians, and he had it.
You know, I think one of the things that he was so good at was just remembering even the smallest detail about people. So, you know, you could meet him and he would know your parents and how they were doing, and your siblings or your kids, or you know, what sports they were involved in, and he was just really good at having that personal connection.
I didn't know that John was an Eagle Scout, but he made a point of coming to both of my sons' Eagle Scout ceremony, and when the part came where all Eagle Scouts come forward to reconfirm their oath, John went right up to the stage, not as a mayor, but just as a friend and another Eagle Scout. And it meant a lot to me and my family and the boys that he attended those and did that for them.
I'll never forget, and I had a couple issues with cancers 2 different times, about 10 years apart, and coming out of the room, and the first person I see is Mayor John Cruz.
John would sincerely ask you how your family's doing, or how your day's been, and he would get emotional as he spoke to you about it.
He set a really good example of patience and understanding and you know, sympathy, consideration for the public's concerns.
We used to play tennis, him and my father and Claire Dallas used to play tennis down at Pete, and John was pretty competitive, and none of us were very good at that time. But John would line up, and if I would move to the center of the net to try to cut off a shot, he'd always try that one right down the alley, and he was successful maybe 1 out of 10 times. And whenever he did it that one time, he would kind of point at you and say, "I got you."
John and I grew up together in the same neighborhood, played at the same city parks, and we were on the same Lions Club baseball team. John was the pitcher, I was the catcher. We were in a championship game, tied up game, and they had our opponent had a person on third base, and somehow John picked up the signal from that person's coach to suicide play to home base. And so the guy took off running, and John pitched out to me, and we nailed the guy halfway down the line. And John was jumping for joy because we had just won the city championship, the baseball championship. And I'm still down in my tag in the runner out position, and John was jumping up and down so much that his foot stomped on my hand, and we had steel cleats back then. And I bled like a son of a gun, and after it healed, on my top of my hand is the C for the cleat, but also for Cruz. So I've had this all my life since then.
When I was the North Cedar Neighborhood Association chairperson, we had set up a cleanup, I think it was Saturday morning, and I went outside at 7 in the morning, and Mayor Cruz had left a note and a couple bags of garbage saying that he couldn't be at the cleanup, but he was out at 6:30 in the morning picking up some garbage, and he left me a couple bags of garbage. So a little odd, but truly Mayor Cruz's style to show that he thought it was important and put the effort in to be a part of it. So.
Thought about all the celebrations and the volunteering work that he had done within organizations in Cedar Falls. And usually we would say, as we were ordering t-shirts for something, get one for John. And John would appear in a t-shirt, and I got to thinking, he probably has a closet full of t-shirts.
We were in Des Moines one time, we were accepting an award for Blue Zones.
There was a group of people that were invited to go with the mayor at that announcement in Des Moines.
Mayor Cruz was there along with Dave and I and a number of other citizens. And Governor Branstad made the presentation.
Governor Terry Branstad invited us up to the stage, and as we walked up, Governor Branstad looked at John Cruz and said,
"John, it seems like you've been mayor forever."
And he said, "Just as long as you've been governor."
And it was kind of an example of his quick wit.
I didn't know it at the time, but I had a bit of a glimpse into my future in 1975 when my wife Karen and I hosted a Super Bowl party. And Mayor Cruz showed up at the party with a budget, and we spent the entire game trying to balance the budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
I don't think you can look at any one part of the city and say, hey, John Cruz impacted just this area. If you look anywhere from the city, from the trees to the businesses to the industrial park to the trails, all of those are initiatives John Cruz had in some way, shape, or form.
You know, Cedar Falls is probably the envy of a lot of cities in the state of Iowa. I look at the industrial park out there, I look at the bike trails, I look at a viable downtown, and he just had visions, and he put committees together to look at least 5 years or 10 years ahead, what we can expect. And he always did that, and he listened to the staff and he listened to the community.
I consider John Cruz to be an icon of Cedar Falls, and I think the community has great respect for John and what he's done. A lot of things that are very obvious and a lot of things that a lot of us that know him real well understand behind the scenes.
I think for Mayor Cruz, it was more than his job. I think it was his life's work. And I think that when you have that mentality, when you come into a role like that, I think it changes the way you interact with the position and how you come to work every day. For him, it was his only function was to do what he thought was best for Cedar Falls and to try to set us up for success.
He was unique, I believe, in city governments anywhere. John was around for a long time. He had a very interesting background and was highly intelligent. He had a unique personality that a lot of people would probably comment on, but John was just kind of deceptively sharp. He just really had some characteristics that people might misjudge, but he was on top of things, and it was quite a force of nature in Cedar Falls.
You know, we'd talk about a person and he could tell them what street they lived on. And he just knew about everybody in town.
It seemed like he was always out there and he was always doing what he could to make Cedar Falls a better community.
Not only I, but I think most of Cedar Falls will miss his presence in our lives.
Mayor Cruz's son, Ryan, I think maybe said it best. John Cruz didn't look at the position of mayor as his job. He looked at it as a calling.
He was a tireless supporter of all acts of community, whether they were artistic, athletic, or civic in nature. Whether it was an event at the Gallagher Blue Dorn or simply a child running a lemonade stand, he was likely to make an appearance to show his support. Shortly after hearing he'd been awarded this tremendous honor, my father humbly told me, "You're not supposed to get this award for doing your job." But in truth, being mayor wasn't a job to my father, it was a calling. A job is a 9-to-5 stint that you repeat Monday through Friday in order to collect a check. My father was never off the clock as a mayor. Both in times of joy and tribulation, his thoughts were occupied with appreciating the amazing city he loved and considering ways to help it continue thriving. When a citizen had a concern, he would listen, and although it's never possible to please everyone, I know he always acted in what he felt was the best interest of the community.
I'm really going to miss him because we spent a lot of time together, not only as his campaign chairman and treasurer, but as a dear friend.
There won't be anybody around like him for a long time.
I will miss the man. He was a good friend, I know, to you and to me, and I always tell my wife, he's the only guy that ever called me with any frequency whatsoever. But he'd call at all hours and just want to talk, and I'll miss that.
Me too.
And he was always honest. And I'm one that I don't like it if someone tells me something that's not true. and John was always very honest, and I will really miss him.
But John was a good guy, and I'll miss him.
Would want to thank John and let him know that the community is a better place than it was when he came, and we're going to continue to work to make it that much better.
Thank you for watching this special edition of the Mayor's Corner, and thanks to city staff for putting this together. And thank you to all that took their time to let us know their thoughts and stories of Mayor John Cruz. Godspeed to his wife Renelle and their entire family. They are in our thoughts and prayers. And God bless the city that he loved. Thank you.